to everybody. We're nearly on the hour. So I'm just welcoming everyone and then we'll get going. I think we've got, I see, Andres from Peru, welcome. Thank you everyone for letting us know where you're from. It's very interesting to see where you are from. So thank you so much. And let's go. We're ready to go. And Melbourne, wow, that's must be very late at night for you right now in Melbourne. So welcome everybody here. I'm very excited to bring governance around the world's next episode in governance in Argentina. Of course, our next event is happening on the 22nd of September. It's still under wraps, so you can't register for it yet. But that is our annual governance summit, where we're going to be talking about essentially where we've moved in terms of ISO 37000. We have it in September because that is the anniversary of the publication of ISO 37000. So we will be getting back to you with who's going to be there and who's going to be speaking. Again, last year we had Prof. Garrett, Peter Day, Prof. King, Bob Tricker, Prof. Tricker. So we had all the big names, and this year, instead of having a males only contingent, we're going to be bringing in a lot more female representations and women in governance. So that's going to be quite interesting. So save the date for that, 22nd of September. But right now I have two very important people on the line. Both were involved in the drafting of ISO 37000. And I'd like to welcome Adriana Rosenfed and Enrique. Now, I'm not going to say your surname, Enrique. Maybe you can tell us what your surname is.
Yes, it's Prini Estebecorena. Prini and Estebecorena. It's a mix of Italian and Basque.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Well, welcome to both of you. And Enrique, I'd like to start, I'll ask you if you could kick us off and give us a little bit of insight in governance in Argentina. Thank you.
Well, okay. Well, good morning, good night, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a great day, and we are very happy to be here. And thank you, Caroline, and the Good Governance Academy, to let us talk about Argentina and what is the scenario today in our landscape of governance. I will try to share the scheme. Just a second. Just a little bit. Okay. Okay, I think that you can see the presentation, okay, people? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Well, the main issue here is that we are trying to share with you. Well, that's a little bit of myself. I'm practitioner in compliance and in corporate governance since my early days. I worked for Buenos Aires Stock Exchange, and from then to some corporations, and then we started fiddling with the idea of compliance. That's why we've been working with Mr. King and GRI for many years. That's why we have an experience in the trenches on how to cope with corporate governance. And here is not really a good news, but is the news that the corporate governance is here to stay. And we in developing countries embrace the idea, the concept of corporate governance, but we will be seeing in my little presentation how some issues are conflicting with the introduction, no, and here specifically the relationship with many stakeholders is a little bit problematic, and with the shareholders. Mainly, this is the structure today on ownership, and on what kind of companies are in our economies. And in developing countries, we are not in the structure of 90-10 on intangible assets. We are in an economy with real assets are still here. And on the other hand, we have owners. The companies and the companies as listed companies have their group and their persons who are the owners. And that put a trick on how willing the companies are to share not only information, but to share their management of the companies, because the owners are persons who generally build the company, were very successful in the company building, and they are not very willing to share with the public not only the information of what they're going to do and how they're going to do the things, but the problem of how you manage the company, how you run the company. And that's a little a huge conflict in our road for a corporate governance as northern or central countries understood. And on the other hand, we have another issue that, as you know, we are moving from a restricted economy of capitalism to what the Davos people talk about as stakeholder capitalism. That's why we understand the stakeholder as having more power and more something to say in the run of companies, and that the companies are not only providers of profit for the shareholders and a service of a product to the consumers, are more than that. And the owners are starting to realize that, but they are dragging their feet in order to have this idea or understanding that stakeholder capitalism now is here to stay. That's why in our economy and in our scenario, it was a hard war to push the companies who have a strong ownership to accept at the very beginning disclosure, and now in our, as I will show you, to have a clear scenario of sharing committees and sharing part of the information, and at the end of the day, part of the management of the company with the public or the investors. The other thing that is important to bear in mind is that in generally Argentina and South American companies are not a common law companies, are based on the codified and the unified structure of legal entities. And that's make a huge change on the reasoning of why there are so many structures to be put in the board. For instance, the audit committee for us is a duplication, because as you may see here, the board of directors in our companies is fully aware that they are responsible for everything. Is on the contrary, the management is not responsible for their actions. The board of directors is responsible for everything. That's why many of the tools that corporate governance is imposing to the board of directors are not needed in our legal structure, because the board of directors itself have the entire responsibility, and this exception is really impossible to prove. That's why the board of directors are unlimited and jointly responsible for everything in the company. On the other way around, the management may say, I am an employee, I don't have any responsibility, I follow orders. of the board of directors. It's completely different, the structure of responsibility, and that's something that we have to bear in mind when we tackle certain tools that corporate governance is trying to share with the community of the international community, and see why some of the companies of Europe or some of the companies of Latin America are dragging their feet or understanding there is a duplication of activities. On the other hand, and especially in Argentina, we have a special capital market structure. We don't have a stock exchange as you know in some other parts of the country, because our history was that in Argentina, when the companies started trading their stocks, they started trading the stock in what it calls the Bolsa de Comercio. No, it's an stock, it's an exchange, but the commerce exchange. That's why, for instance, as you see here, we have financiers, we have manufacturers, we have cattle breeders in the board of that organization. That's why it's another tackle to cross and have the problem that at the end of the day, they are not professionals of the finance and the capital market who are dealing with in our exchange. But pressing and moving forward and working with them, now the market have changed in their structure. We create what it calls the BIMA, that is a new structure, a new entity that is financed and sharehold by these participants, and now we have what we can call a stock exchange at itself. The other thing that is important is to see what are the objectives that we are trying to achieve in our structure of corporate governance, and really we want to strive in the direction of helping small investors. No, because here in Argentina we don't have we have many small investors, and also the countries willing to enter into the OECD. No matter if some governments are moving forward faster or slower, at the end of the day, we want to rationalize and to adhere to the OECD's rules. That's why we are accepting many of the indications of the OECD in order to be willing or to be accepted as member. Also, we have a huge structure of SMEs, and we are helping the companies to enter into the market. It's not an easy thing, because as far as you put more requirements of corporate governance, the requirements are more costly or more burdensome for the SMEs. That's why it's a delicate balance, and we have a special listing structure for SMEs that require less things and less requirements over the company. Also, we want to improve a federal capital market, that is, the provinces can work in the capital market, and the simplification of negotiation is something that is required and is pushed by the new technologies, because at the end of the day, we are now facing the blockchain revolution, and we are facing that the monopoly of the stock exchange are a little bit blurred, and if the stock exchange do not keep the pace of easy negotiation and easy requirements to invest, well, we are seeing some dinosaurs that they will be disappearing. That's why it's a huge challenge for the stock market in Argentina. On the other hand, we have new regulations on compliance. that's another huge change in Argentina. 2 years ago was passed this law that mainly the main structure is that they put criminal liability on corporations. We also have criminal liability for the persons who committed crimes, but the news here is that the corporations are liable not only for crimes committed by them, but the test of this law is the benefit. If the corporation is benefited by a crime, they are responsible and they have to pay huge amount of money. We are talking about 2 times to 5 times the benefit that they receive out of the crime. But the good news on corporate governance is that they have to make a compliance program in order to comply with the law, and this compliance program have many features that at the end of the day are features who help the companies to have a great corporate governance, because the structure of tone of the top, the structure of having procedures, they having a defense for whistleblower. At the end of the day, they enhance the transparency, and many of the institutions of compliance were based in the experience of past corporate governance scandals or problems in the market. To make a very fast recollection of the path of corporate governance, we started back with the main issues in 2001 with our first decree putting corporate governance into the scenario after the crisis of Enron. Then we enhanced that with mandatory comply and explain mechanism of what is the status of your organization in implementing certain rules. Some were mandatory. For instance, the audit committee was mandatory. But for instance, if you have 2 or 3 independent members in that audit committee, well, that's a must. Then you have to comply, for instance, or a succession committee. Well, at that time, you have to comply or explain why you are not complying or not complaining. Now we will see that changed for a more tough rules because the OECD is asking for more work on that. We adopted the IFRS, the accounting standards for international companies, and we in 2012 we introduced a complete and an independent corporate governance code who have many issues that were basically introduced by the white papers of the OECD and some rules of the United Nations. And in the compliance arena, we were willing to have more requirements. That moved forward to 2016 when we have the framework for Argentines incorporations. And in 2018, the government issued a decree having the structure of good governance for state-owned companies. In Argentina, we have many huge state-owned companies. For instance, the biggest oil company in Argentina is state-owned. That's why it was a huge pace forward trying to adopt. And in 2019, the last government issued a new corporate governance code. But the main issue here was that now you have to comply or saying how or when you will be complying with the rules. That's why you cannot say, I will not willing. You have to, in certain time, you have to adhere to the guidelines. And in the last years, the main focus, as international was also, was on ESG. That's why our regulator, the CNB, issue certain regulations to green and sustainable marketable securities. And in this year, in this month, they issue a proposal of regulation on issuers with bonds or stock in social in project with social impact. That's why Argentina, I think, is moving in the right direction, but it's not easy to adhere to everything that is in the book, because in some moment you have to bear in mind where is the responsibility structure, and in some moment you have to bear in mind that the companies have owners that are not very willing to give power to stakeholders. Okay, I'm stop sharing. I think that there will come up many questions, but we'll see in a minute.
Thank you so much, Enrique. It's a fantastic overview in terms of the understanding of the peculiarities and the national imperatives in Argentina. Too often we look at our own national codes and we think that they are applicable, globally or certainly in other countries. And it's easy to look at the principles and think that they are, easily adopted in other countries. But what we don't give fair recognition for is the legal framework in which that code is to be read. So there are assumptions when you've only worked in your country in a corporate governance. There are assumptions that you've made that perhaps you don't even realize you're making, because you're so instilled in the legislative framework that you're used to. So I think that's, again, reiterating the importance of having all the countries involved in the development of ISO 37000, because those requirements came through very carefully. And I remember, Enrique, in the discussions in drafting that standard, you brought through a lot of the aspects around the compliance obligations because of exactly what you've explained to us today. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone else does on the call. And I'd like to hand over now to Adriana. Adriana was a co-editor of ISO 37000 and also brought through some very important factors and imperatives into 37000 that she's going to take us through some of them now. Thank you, Adriana.
Okay, good morning, and thanks, Caroline, for giving us the opportunity to share with the audience of the Good Governance Academy our points of view. I will start speaking about how we see the contributions of the standards, the voluntary standards, to, let's see if I can share the screen. I'm not being able to share the screen yet. And which screen to share is this one? And then we can look at here at the very beginning. So the idea is to share with you how do we see here in Argentina that the ISO voluntary standards help all kinds of organizations, but especially enterprises, tackling their governance. And I want to take us as a starting point the ISO 26000 process. For us, it was a breaking point. It's we thought about social responsibility as the world did much more associated with philanthropy, but the active participation of Argentina and in the international process made us realize that we had to start being conscious that it's important to incorporate social and environmental considerations, especially in the decision making and accountability of the organization of the enterprises. No, and what is said in the clause 3 of that standard, that was, of course, largely discussed within the group internationally and nationally. It's important because it takes the organizations to a daily imperative of taking into account the importance of ethical behavior. And of course, it gives the path to incorporate in the decision-making processes all those important issues. It also, as Enrique said, here in our country, it's an issue how to engage with stakeholders, a very important issue, and ISO 26000 it also is a very big step forward in that in that subject, because it established that the respect for the stakeholder interest is a principle, one of the 7 principles of social responsibility. And it also, it's important regarding governance and helping organization how to tackle governance, because it also stated the taxonomy of social responsibility, not only for enterprises, for all kinds of organizations. And as you can see in this slide, one of the 7 core subjects that was established as included in the concept of social responsibility is organizational governance. And it's not just one more of the 7 core subjects, it's the central one, as it's seen in the slide, because it was understood that enterprises must have, or organizations must have, a holistic approach on social responsibility, and the decisions regarding all the other 6 core subjects, of course, were in the head of the of governance. So one step forward that ISO did in regarding governance and all the issues we are taking into account now was to create 6 years later than ISO 26000 was published. ISO established a new technical committee, specially dedicated to develop standards on governance. And that's, in that framework, there are nowadays 4 different standards. They are a set of 4 standards that we can consider them as a system, because we have a core that is the 37,000 standard on governance. But then, as Enrique said, from there comes a management system standard on compliance that gives light also to the one on anti-bribery and then the one on whistleblowing. So we can see the whole system. And if we go back to what I said about ISO 26000 as a starting point, and this standard as a follow-up of what was said before, we can see that in 37,000, 11 principles are stated, and when the standard explains how they work all together, of course, the standard states that the primary principle is the purpose, of course, is the primary governance principle. Around that, there are other foundational principles, but within the 6 enabling governance principles appear social responsibility and stakeholder engagement. And that enables me to say that along the whole development of these ISO standards, there's a coherence about the concepts, and that is what helps the organizations to work with governance in these new trends or this new framework that we have now, that is the ASG framework, where, of course, stakeholder engagement and social responsibility are within the system and within the governance system. And also it's to have those two principles, and doing as the standard includes them within what must be stated as objectives and measures with indicators, the social performance and the natural environment. That makes or closes the circle about what is expected from the governance of the organization, and it's in the same trend that what is stated by the legal framework that Enrique described before. And that's why we are completely convinced that this whole set of standards helps organizations in their daily duty of governing and taking decisions about what should be or must be done within their enterprises. And of course, these standards that are internationally discussed and are published when the consensus is reached, they are the framework, of course, for a lot of other things. We must remember that, for example, when ISO 26000 was published, the OECD guidelines were revised because of the new recognition of human rights as a core subject of social responsibility, for example. And of course, within this ESG framework, or the one before on social responsibility, for example, SEDEX or SMETA were built, and they all follow those frameworks. No, so that's why it's so important. Our big companies or SMEs can have a clear idea on how they should perform, and that is globally recognized, and they don't have to have different visions if they are in the supply chain of one or another company based in different countries. So that's my presentation, and of course, I think we are going to have some questions, and I'll be very happy to answer them if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Adriana. And just to explain, Adriana is sitting in deep South Argentina, so that's why she's all wrapped up. So thank you very much for joining us from the deep South with the snow all around you. Thank you. And we caught you before you went skiing. So if I can, thank you very much for that, and also giving us a deep insight into the emphasis on stakeholder relations and stakeholder engagement and social responsibility. If I can maybe move to Enrique and ask on that basis, Enrique, you introduced GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, into Argentina. And given that the status of the organizations there are such that they weren't willing to really disclose much of what was actually happening in their organizations, and that their governing structures are such that it's collectively management and governance in one body. So now you've got a very strong almost opposition. It's not only that they don't want to disclose, they collectively together, management and the governing body, are agreeing to essentially not disclose. So how did you bring GRI in, and specifically, obviously on the stakeholder aspect, some of the GRI reporting requirements around that social responsibility?
Well, the people have needs, and the needs for money and finance make the trick. And the people understood that at the end of the day, if they want the financing, they have to cross the river, and they have to realize that. And I have 30 years on energy companies, extractive companies. Well, 10 years ago, they say they will not be funding any following Kyoto Protocol and following Paris Protocol. Well, if you do not change, and if you not send a nice product to the investor community, that was not just a CSR fancy beyond compliant thing. It's a survival thing. That's why you will see now that the SG structure, and I told you at the end that our SEC is moving forward to having this kind of products, because everybody knows that if you not, we say come for the photograph. If you not prepare yourself to be ready on what the market is needed with the X, Y generation are willing to put the money in, and now at the speed of the app in the phone, you have to be willing to change your mood or change your ways drastically. And I think that that was the reason why, for instance, our stock exchange changed their structure. Our stockbrokers changed their way. They collect from commissions on every transaction, because well, they are knowing that on one side the issuers will be in limited capacity to send them products to sell, and on the other hand, there will be the danger of all the Bitcoin and the blockchain structure of outside the stock exchange negotiations. That's why it's a very complicated and risky scenario, and mainly the issuers are the ones who understood, and our work in those past 20 years was to work with the finance guys. That's why I work a lot. I have a master's in finance, because I used to work for a stock exchange. That was, I know what is the rationale of the stock work, the rationale of the owners of the corporation. But the new thing is that the finance guys, the treasurer guys who are managing the money, are needing this kind of tools to collect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great news, because at the end of the day, it's a survival thing. It's not just a fashion or something that I think that is useful for my product to give some flavor or purpose. No. If you don't do that way, you cannot show to the market to ask for investors.
Mm.
And that's why they are trying to do the things following not all, but some of the guidelines of GRI. If you see our CSR reportings in our companies, you will see that it's a hand-picked a scenario of certain KPIs that have some GRI backbone, and but in some cases it's impossible, because the owners of the company are not willing to give that, or in some cases there is legally impossible. That's why if you review any Latin American report, you have to be very aware to read the small caps, no? Because because I'm a lawyer and I work writing the safe harbor provisions, saying, okay, we are following GRI guidelines, say 1, 3, 4, 7, 25, 34, because some of them are not applicable to an Argentinian company, are not applicable to our business, or I will write the other way around, but I will say are not willing to do it. Okay, but yeah, I will make up a little, but at the end of the day, if you scratch the surface, you will see, okay, this guy is not willing to do that, and I think it's okay, because at the end of the day, we are in the profit business of asking for money and having a risk appetite, and well, at the end of the day, the two parts will agree in certain terms. If your risk appetite is not do not like entirely the product, will ask for a premium. But the problem that the companies face 10 years ago is that they don't have any product to show. Okay, now they have a product. At the end of the day, you can market that. No?
Yes.
You can market and put in front of an investor, and at the end of the day, the investor will say yes or not regarding their appetite. For instance, in Argentina now we have 2,400 points of risk, of country risk. Okay, that's why, yes, okay, the returns that an investor will ask to invest in Argentina is 240 points on
has
premium.
to take that into consideration.
Yeah, into the consideration, but okay, the war is big, and there are people who are willing to invest in Argentina in certain business, food, oil and gas, whatever. Okay, we have an upside in certain businesses. We have the Pampas, we have a lot of things that give us an upside in certain businesses, but we have macroeconomic problems. That's why at the end of the day, there will be a risk evaluation. But 10 years ago, we don't have any the product to show. Now you have the product. You have
and the reporting, as you say, you know, the risk premium that goes with not disclosing everything will make you less attractive to somebody who is, for example.
But at the end of the day, it's a matter of risk appetite. The news now is that you have the product to show to the investors. That's the
And
difference.
certainly, sorry, Enrique, and certainly talking about risk appetite, following an ISO standard will give some level of certainty to, because it's been an internationally agreed standard. So there's a question here that's come from Stephen, and let me put that to Adriana. In terms of I know you've done some research in this space, and just in terms of the take-up of these kinds of standards and the adoption, can you give us an indication or some kind of insight into that?
Yes, certainly. We cannot speak about compliance because, as we said, these ISO standards on social responsibility are the 37,000 on governance are not requirement standards. So they are guidelines. But for example, if we speak about reports, we can see that some of them speak about having taken into account ISO 26000, and there are a lot of them that they don't claim, they don't speak about that, but the structure is the ISO 26000 structure. So of course, it was used as a basis or to produce the report. And in the last year, we start seeing that some enterprises from the financial sector and some others from the food producing sector are starting to declare that they use SASB and that they use the integrated reporting framework also. So they started reporting and having something to show, as Enrique said, and they are following the international trends, and they are starting to report having in mind the ASG framework that is asked nowadays. And that regarding what we can see from the reports, but also we have a lot of experience because, as I mentioned, there are the SEDEX, the international platform for enterprises, has an audit mechanism that is called SMETA that follows all the subjects included in the standards we are talking about. And from there derives a lot of social audits performed in our big companies and very little companies in Argentina, not only from tier 1 or tier 2 in the supply chain, but perhaps they are tier 5 in the supply chain. And they receive the social audit, and they have to go through the social audit. But not only one social audit, because perhaps they are just publishers that work for 3 or 4 huge multinational companies, and they receive social audits for each of them. So having these common frameworks make it much more easier for them to go through those social audits. Perhaps in the protocols, there are little changes because the big enterprises and the multinational enterprises, they adapt the protocols to their own needs. Some, for example, highlight land rights, others living wages. So it depends on what are they focused on. But at the end of the day, they are very similar, highlighting only some issues, but all the other is similar, and that make it much more easier for those little or SMEs to go through those processes. So, and there you can see also that they took into account the ISO standards, because if not, they won't be prepared to go through the audits.
Well, yes, because as developing countries, we are dependent on the supply. We are suppliers to the developed countries, and if they're asking for those due diligences on specifically social matters, then it does make sense that at least there's a kind of a standardization and certainty. So it sounds like there's quite a high adoption as a result. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Because perhaps not declared, but in reality, they are adopted.
Right.
Yes.
There's a question here, and I'm going to go to Enrique because this is almost a legal one. It says, how does the Argentinian government support good governance practices? So, for example, are there any whistleblower kind of legislation? Is that in place?
I show you very fast in the presentation, but the criminal regulation on corporate criminal responsibility implies a specific whistleblowing regulation and whistleblower protection. That's why in that case, I think Argentina is leading the pack. I work for this for many compliance organizations internationally, and we are our law, I think that is one of the ones who are copied by some other countries, because it has this feature of responsibility without any investigations. That's it's an automatic responsibility of the corporation without any proof. That's why if you are benefited by a crime, you have to pay. End of story. That's because the most complicated thing in a compliance investigation or in a corruption investigation is the proof of the crime.
Yes.
That's why, well, this law avoids that. If you are benefited by a crime, the law require or thinks that you are part of the gang. And if you are not proficient enough to control your, I don't know, your suppliers, your because no one will benefit for a crime for free. Okay, there are no crimes, there are no criminals moving around the world helping companies with their crimes. No, because at the end of,
for no comeback, yes.
But it's one of the first law in Latin America that have this concept, and it's very important for practitioners because at the end of the day, if you are not doing the things right, you have to pay. Because in the old days, the corporations make the easy step. They fire the manager who did it.
Yeah.
And they have no responsibility because they say, okay, I fired the guy. He's a rotten apple. I fire him.
Moving along.
Okay, well, now you cannot say that. If you want, you can fire the rotten apple. But at the end of the day, but you have to pay for the benefit 4 times to 5 times the benefit. And it's a lot of money because imagine merchandise that costs $1 million that you bribe the customs to enter your country. Well, it will be $2 million to $10 million fine.
Wow, it's a good disincentive.
Yeah.
I have another question here for you as well. It's about governance in state-owned entities. So the question from Andres here is governance in state-owned entities in Latin America has many challenges. It was mentioned that there is a code for corporate governance for SOEs in Argentina. How are you dealing with board nominations to limit political involvement of the incumbent administrations in the day-to-day management of these state companies because they're so tightly linked?
Yeah, well, that's a challenge, and the OECD have a great code to be followed, and the main thing is that the state-owned companies and even the ministers or the the public officers have an operational area and they have a political area. The political area will be in the board. There you can put some politicians and design a policy. But from there to down to the operation have to be professionals. For instance, in the oil and gas business, well, we have people who drill, who refine, and to sell the gas. But at the end of the day, the only political thing is at the top. We say, okay, we will be drilling gas in certain area because we find that is better for us economically, but it's better for the economy of the region. Okay, that's your political decision. But at the end of the day, from there to the end consumer, you have to follow a professional approach. That's why these structures that are imposed to these companies cut the relationship not only on corruption, but on the operational side. The politicians have to stop at the political level when they design the policy for that area. End of story.
So it stops at policy level.
Yeah.
Which is great.
And enhance the professionals at the operational level. That's why you have to have, when you research for people, you have to have engineers who are devoted to that expertise. They have knowledge on oil and gas in that case, and at the end of the day, they are not moving with the change of the government. If every 4 years you change the government, but every 4 years you cannot change your energy policy. Well, in Argentina we did it, and we have the problems of that. But well, one thing is the letter of the law, and one thing is the reality. I'm not saying that it's easy, and I am saying, for instance, in that moment is follow. No, it's not follow. Now you have politics till the pump. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Yes, well, I know why. But the spirit and how it's written, the code states that they have to cut the relationship of politicians at the end of the pipeline.
Right. Thank you, Enrique. We've got enough time for one more question, and I see we've only got 3 minutes left. So Adriana, I'm going to put a question to you, and that's really, I'm taking some of the questions there, but in terms of compliance in Argentinian organizations, do you think there's too much compliance around reporting, or do you think it actually is sufficient to enable what needs to happen? You're on mute. Sorry, Adriana.
Sorry. I think we moved forward a lot from where we were 10 years ago, and we still have a lot to be done, especially changing mindset and allowing more disclosure. As Enrique said, there's a lot of information that goes around and doesn't appear in the reports. And well, but also I think that it's not only the law or the legal framework, but also we are in a state of the world where stakeholders also have to play the roles and have to ask what is said and what is not said, and to question that. I always, when I teach, I always ask my students, doesn't matter if they're undergraduate or graduate, doesn't matter, if they are clients of a bank, for example, and the banks here usually publish their reports. And I always ask them, is as clients, they read the report, and they didn't. And if they answered, because where the where you find the report in the website. Besides that, there's a link where you can comment on the report, and they never use that. Yes, it's usual here to have that opportunity, or even inside the report, it's mentioned where you can comment on what is reported. Here, it's very common to have that, but nobody uses that opportunity. So, we still have to do as society a lot, no, about improving and make it more giving importance to the effort, because even if some information it's not shown, it's a big effort to present and to publish a report. And I don't know if society, it's done, because of course investors are asking for those reports, as Enrique said. I completely agree with that. But we should add another actor pushing that forward, and that is society, of course.
Yes, we should actually be reading the reports.
Yes, of course.
We can't complain.
Investors.
Yeah, we can't complain and sit on the sideline if we're not reading them ourselves. Who are we to comment?
Of course. So, yeah, and there I think we must still educate the community about that possibility, and we are we have a lot to do in that field. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we were actually worried we didn't have so much to talk about, but we are out of time, and we could actually take another half an hour talking about what's happening in Argentina. But thank you very much, Adriana, for coming on board from the deep south of Argentina. Thank you, Enrique, for taking your time. I know that it's an expensive time as a lawyer, so thank you. We really do appreciate your time from both of you. Thank you for coming on board. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Have a nice day, though, you two guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.